Hello again, everybody, and welcome to your first of your double dose of our Chris Chan quickie readings. And like the one we did on hypocrisy, this one is also going to be maybe a little bit on the shorter side. However, that's probably because it's something that is quite limited, but not necessarily limited to things that can be documented, if you catch my drift. And it's called Chris and Kindness. I knew they were trolls, but they had good intentions, and they were genuinely kind individuals. I am not listening to your bullshit. Chris showing that he prefers kindness over reason. Now, here's the thing. You could interpret this as saying that all Chris is trying to do, really, from this, is try to display that, at the end of the day, Chris is trying to be the better person. But even a good person is not devoid of logic, if that makes sense. A good person should know the difference between right and wrong. And, well, what intentions do you suppose there were behind trolling Chris, apart from trying to make Chris look like an idiot? How can you consider those to be good intentions? That's again, Chris might possibly... And I'm not saying... Listen... I'm not going to say for 1 second Chris should be this, that, or the other. That's not really... I don't have that power, and it's not something I think Chris would take an interest in anyway. However, why Chris came to this conclusion is something that's a bit harder to interpret or harder to understand. Also, for I am the kind and compassionate Christine Chandler. This is Chris proclaiming his kindness and his ability to roll his R's. You know what? For what they're worth, we may as well take a look at the video, because I'll say this and keep saying it. It sounds like, well, Chris becoming a constipated turkey as opposed to, well, there we go. As opposed to Chris technically rolling her R's, and this is it. I like the fact smug is what it comes out of this, but let's do it. A fun new trick. This is good.
Hello everyone, this is Christine Chandler coming to you live from home once again with a special brand new skill I've just figured out. Yes! For I am the kind and compassionate Christine Chandler. And now I can roll my R's. I am still in practice. So everybody is honored to be rolling in the press. For I am not Danger Dolan, the narrator of these Super Planet Dolan videos, but I am powerful nonetheless in that sense. Not great and powerful, I'm kind and compassionate. Christine Chandler. Now everyone stay green and go out and zap to the extreme. Have a lovely day.
Now, it should be worth noting before we go anywhere, like, any further with this, is that Chris claims to be, kind and compassionate through this video. However, that video came shortly after, like, a back and forth argument Chris had with Lady of the Cosmo on Twitter, because Chris was referring to her as darling. Lady of the Cosmo did not appreciate this 1 second because of the fallout that Chris had with Doopy Doo over. And Chris spent the entire, argument really with Lady of the Cosmo trying to justify her behavior during all of this, and seemingly trying to change Lady of the Cosmo's judgment of the situation, pretending as though Lady of the Cosmo actually enjoyed being called darling and stuff like that. Even though people were rightfully telling Chris that it was not Chris's place to suddenly start deciding what was right and not right for certain people. So Chris can't really be that kind. Well, it's not really that hard to explain, but Chris should have come to the conclusion that just because certain people like it does not mean everybody's going to like it. But basically, yeah, and it's also because Lady of the Cosmo was good friends with Doopy Doo over anyway. So there are reasons for this. And by the way, yeah, Chris's rationale was apparently just to roll her R's. That's apparently that's more than enough to be called kind and compassionate. And in case you are also wondering, Chris never did this, rolled her R's again after this on camera. So now what? Despite all his moments of rage, death threats, lies, and yuck, Chris does have a soft side. It's called his belly. And he is not afraid to show it. Sometimes. As of recently, he will more often than not be motivated to act kind towards other people, even towards complete strangers, due to his autism and upbringing making it difficult to empathize with others. These attempts are often awkward and occasionally cross the line to disrespect. Chris has also shown a number of times that due to his facade of kindness to others, he can very easily be manipulated by other people, as he rarely questions anyone's intentions beforehand, as that would be the unkind thing to do. This shows that Chris used to have a strong appeal to just being kind to people for its own sake, rather than so that he can be more approachable, as he cannot distinguish when it is most appropriate to act and offer versus politely declining it. The origins of his kindness. Given his obsessions with fictional media and what we know about his formative years, it's very likely that Chris learned much of his ideals and how to act towards others from watching television as a child. Note that Chris once stated on a school assignment that he considers TV as an effective part of child rearing, I should say. I almost said child reading. Among 80s cartoons like Transformers and The Smurfs, he has specifically cited Care Bears and especially The Adventures of the American Rabbit, his first real role model before Sonic the Hedgehog, as influences. This might also explain why Chris preaches the importance of virtues he has demonstrably failed to live up to for years, and still does, sees the world with simplistic black and white morality, resists anyone telling him hard truths because they don't sound nice and sympathetic enough, easily latches on to anything seemingly beneficial to him without a second thought and so forth. His tendencies towards binary perception and poor perception of reality presumably didn't help one bit either. So, bizarrely very big issues. But the problem again, the way they phrase things would say fair enough. It's because Chris sort of lacks that level of cognition for Chris to realize that the world is nowhere near as black as simple as that. And I wonder if Chris just continued to live in a world that was that simple. Maybe things would have worked out for the better. But unfortunately, we don't live in a simple world. Sometimes it would be better if we did, but that's not, reflective of the reality of life. But maybe also a part of this, some people could say that, well, Chris is still locked in that cupboard with his toys. Moving on. Chris and his morality. Save sorbet or buy Lego. Chris conflicting with his morality and his desires at the same time. And by the way, this is there's no text here whatsoever, but then again, we have this. Pro tip. Please be aware that Chris described being involved in a literal MF in early June 2021 and slept with his mother every 3 days, until Chris was finally ordered out of Bob's house on the 30th of July by social services. Revising this page will be a difficult task. Altering this older portrait of our selfish but harmless idiot would make it harder to illustrate the changes in him and his ability to justify all of his own actions, however depraved. Like his beliefs on religion and gender, Chris's stance on morality is difficult to interpret. Chris often claims that he is a kind, good-natured, saintly person that doesn't deserve scorn. To a certain extent, he is right, but for all the wrong reasons. Despite what one may think about Chris, the reality is that he is a relatively harmless and is somewhat capable of distinguishing right and wrong. But that is only scratching the surface, as Chris's selfishness and naivete often turn out to be the main culprits behind him doing immoral actions, rather than true malevolence. One infamous example of this behaviour is when he foolishly drew and uploaded She Came for Quick.jpg onto Encyclopedia Dramatica as a means to combat all of the pictures of ducks and pickles he found on the site, as well as to prove his straightness, not thinking about how Megan might respond to being depicted in such an undignified manner in a shoddily drawn piece of porn. Megan, who was looking for just about any other reason to stop talking to Chris, was understandably revolted. However, what cements the fact that his naivete was partly responsible is how Chris tried to explain to Megan what happened in the picture itself. Thinking that she was inexperienced with the old SCX and didn't understand what was going on, rather than the obvious fact that she was depicted in such a demeaning situation, and that Chris obviously wants to pound her. An outsider's account has confirmed this, specifically that of Mims and Lucas. Mims stated that Chris didn't seem aware he had committed wrongdoings to justify getting banned from the game place, but he certainly knew he was no longer welcome there. Though Chris didn't seem to recall anything beyond a so-called "we" incident or shouting a loud outburst twice, he still saw fit to try and apologize to Michael Snyder in a predictably failed bid to have his ban repealed. Whoever Chris acts kindly to depends on who you would classify as his friends and his enemies. If someone gets in the way of whatever he wants to do, or he shifts the blame on someone else for all of his failings, Chris will deem that someone as a troll that wants nothing more than him to make his miserable, showing very little respect of whoever inconvenienced him. Whoever Chris doesn't classify as a troll or feels temporarily joined the side of the trolls are his friends. Typically, Chris will attempt to befriend internet celebrities and staff members of the media that he enjoys. Yeah, I know that felt like a lot. To break this down in a more simpler turn of phrase, if it was because Chris thought he was doing right or tried to justify his actions, then that's what. Listen, trying to explain your rationale is one thing. Rather than just straight up saying sorry for knowing you did wrong is another. Because sometimes a lot of the memories are abstained in the incidents itself. She Came for Quick being one, and, well, Chris being banned from the gameplay is quite another. And there are reasons why Chris's ban was never uplifted from the gameplays, because a ban meant a hard stop. Among many other things that, Chris did that Chris specifically did not seem to mention. Empathy. Chris has a very warped sense of empathy. This could be attributed to his autism, as autistic people generally have difficulty empathizing with others. Not always, but let's keep rolling. Although Chris's case has been much more to do with his upbringing. His dubious, if virtually non-existent, ability to empathize has also led him to denounce most to anyone with whom he had a conflict as mean, heartless, or even flat-out villainous, irrespective of all evidence pointing towards responsibility for turmoil falling on him. Despite fervently chiding them for allegedly lacking a heart, he often neglects to take their thoughts and feelings into consideration himself, preferring to instead jump to conclusions just because they happen to deviate from his extremely simplistic ideas, not to mention deny him what he feels entitled to have. So it's basically, it's all me, 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 me. It's always about Chris. Motivations for doing good. Love Quest and Gal Pals. While socializing with his alleged pals, Chris always takes the time to act as kind as possible to them, to the point where it becomes downright disturbing. Unsurprisingly, Chris has used social media as a means of continuing his love quest and finding the sweetheart he has desired for over a decade. Because of that, most of the people Chris attempts to befriend are girls, with and without boyfriends. In terms of friendships on social media, whenever he feels he's up the creek without a paddle, Chris will almost always doubt that he is in any way responsible for anybody turning against him because, in his eyes, He is too kind for anyone to simply block him on Twitter or to be hated by the masses. Even by the time Chris was starting to use Twitter regularly, the damage was already being done. Also because this was after the house fire, so in many cases quite literally. And instead, shifts the blame on the trolls. This, coupled with the fact that Chris refuses to see the worst out of his friends unless he gets the hint that they denied access to their China, makes it sound even more disturbing. Defending others. As mentioned above with the Doopy saga, Chris has a tendency to believe he is doing good when in reality, he isn't. A common motivation for doing what he believes to be good is so that he can defend someone he thinks is close to him. Chris has demonstrated his numerous times with troll-created sweethearts, such as attempting to defend Julie from Clyde Cash in voice chat sessions, then driving all the way to Cleveland, Ohio, in his beliefs that she would be there. Chris has also attempted to shift the focus of weaning against Doopy to himself in his Twitter campaign, when in reality the situation, far less serious than he thought it was, could have been resolved had Chris simply quieted down. Avoiding trouble. In other instances, Chris will only act kindly to people to avoid getting into trouble. Whenever he tries to apologize to anyone, it's usually for reasons such as getting his PlayStation Network account back or an attempt to get back into places he was banned from. Personal benefit. In general, the reason for Chris's acting kindly towards others is his thinking that doing so is the best way to manipulate them into doing whatever he wants them to do. This is possibly due to his misunderstanding of simple etiquette and manners. Like, for example, if you try and do a good thing, you should be doing it for the right reasons, and Chris, obviously, it's a conflict of interest in more cases than not. How Chris demonstrates kindness. Apologizing. As mentioned above, Chris has a very limited understanding of empathy. On the rare occasions in which Chris admits his misdeeds and apologizes for them, ulterior motives are usually, if not always, present. This is in part to his upbringing and otherwise due to other things such as autism, all of which limit his ability to understand empathy. Curiously, Chris seems to lack the tendency to over-apologize for things, a trait known to be found in people on the spectrum, and normally will remain obstinate and particularly stubborn in his opinions unless forced to admit he was wrong, or if apologizing for some self-serving purpose. Using pet names. To refer to a gal pal in a kind, non-sexual manner, Chris will often refer to them as either darling or dear. However, since Chris obviously doesn't understand how creepy it is to refer to a girl he's just met on the internet as a darling, most girls who talk to Chris online will be set off by Chris's misuse of the word. Gift giving. Chris has shown several times his belief that kindness can be equated to simply furnishing others with luxuries such as video games, movies, comic books, and other such gifts. Yeah, that's called just buying friendship. It doesn't work like that, Chris. You know, OnlyFans is only just a website. It's not the real world. Not realizing that charity alone is not the only virtue required to be considered kind. Perhaps the most noticeable instance of this was during his friendship with Megan, in which he carried out a protracted program of gift-giving practically right up to the moment it all came crashing down. The idea guys manipulated this aspect of Chris's beliefs on kindness to have him be extorted into providing them with vast sums of money, alongside brand new video games and consoles, as revealed by invoices provided by Chris to the Guard Dogs during the early stages of Operation Kingsnake. And why Chris and Chris is still probably under the belief that they were gonna she was gonna get the money back in C-197. Genuine acts of kindness. During the Liquid Chris saga, Chris wanted to get Liquid arrested and therefore placing him in prison. However, after talking with Casey, he decided that he would hate to see you in jail out of respect and of care, because she would be heartbroken. It is worth mentioning, however, that in only a few seconds later, he threatens to get him tried in court, so this should be taken with a grain of salt. Chris once participated in raising funds for Alex Lemonade Stand, a charity program that works to raise awareness of childhood cancer. Although he did it in memory of his deceased father, who actually passed away as a result of a heart disease rather than cancer, it was still considered a positive contribution Chris did make to society. He also donated to the Red Cross in the wake of Hurricane Harvey in September of 2017. On a relatively minor note, Lucas of The Game Place recalled Chris brought in his Wii for a tournament on the release of Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Bear in mind that this was one positive moment involving Chris that Lucas recollected, and Mims stated he felt Chris lacked any redeeming quality to speak of whatsoever. So, pretty two conflicting opinions to say the least, eh? And, well, there we are, guys. What a conflicting and very bizarre, article that was. Because are we under the impression Chris is kind because Chris thinks that it's just the right thing to do? Or is Chris under the impression that being kind means you will be rewarded with anything you could ask for? Is this down ultimately to, well, the way Chris sees other people doing it via television? Or is this down to the fact that probably Chris was an incredibly spoiled child and it was just as a way of getting Chris on board? Sounds like crap parroting if you ask me, but then again, well, yeah, there's no other way. It's crap parroting. But with that being said, well, what do you guys think? But either way, be kind and look after each other because, well, I'm only saying this for your guys' benefit. Remember, this is not the Ellen DeGeneres show. And I will see all of you guys again later. Bye-bye.